August 15th, 1944. The sun struggles to pierce the dense jungle of Peleliu. Sweat drips from Japanese soldiers crouched in camouflaged foxholes. Their rifles are ready, their nerves taut. The air is still, almost expectant. Then the first streaks of fire cut across the sky. Bright, unrelenting, unlike anything they've seen. M8 rocket launchers and TBF rockets scream from hidden American positions, trailing fire and smoke. Trees erupt in flames, bunkers shatter in clouds of debris. The infantry freezes. Machine guns rattle, but the rockets move too fast, too wide, too precise. Every salvo seems to defy probability. Men duck, shout, pray. But the air is full of fire and thunder. A lieutenant peers over a shattered ridge and mutters, disbelief in his voice. They're everywhere, all at once. The Japanese defensive doctrine, built on discipline and entrenched positions, collapses under the spectacle. Above them, the sky has been claimed. America's rockets have turned it into a blazing instrument of war, and nothing could have prepared them for the vision. Before the roar of rockets lit the Pacific skies, American military planners had been experimenting with new ways to deliver firepower efficiently. Traditional artillery, though devastating, was often slow, cumbersome, and vulnerable to counterattack. In the dense jungles and coral ridges of the Pacific Islands, speed and mobility were as critical as raw destructive power. The solution came in the form of rocket artillery, a weapon designed to combine the shock of artillery with the precision of concentrated fire. The M8 rocket launcher, commonly mounted on half-tracks or used in infantry teams, became the backbone of this strategy. Simple, reliable, and portable, it could fire salvos of 4.5-inch rockets in rapid succession, saturating enemy positions with explosive force. Unlike conventional shells, these rockets traveled in visible arcs, leaving trails of fire and smoke, a psychological as well as physical weapon. The noise, the sudden eruptions of destruction, and the unpredictability of where the next rocket would strike were enough to unsettle even the most disciplined defenders. Alongside the M8, the TBF rocket-equipped aircraft provided aerial delivery of firepower with unprecedented reach. Pilots could launch volleys from low altitude, targeting bunkers, artillery emplacements, and troop concentrations from above. This combination of ground and air rockets allowed American forces to strike simultaneously from multiple angles, overwhelming entrenched Japanese positions that were built to resist conventional artillery or infantry assault. The development of these weapons was not spontaneous. It was the product of a meticulous program of testing, adaptation, and field experimentation. Engineers refined propellants to ensure consistent velocity, shaped warheads for maximum blast effect against fortifications, and designed launch rails for mobility and rapid deployment. Crews practiced endlessly, learning the timing, spacing, and angles necessary to produce effective barrages. Each salvo became a choreographed sequence of fire, mathematics, and human coordination. By 1943, as the island-hopping campaign advanced, the American military recognized the psychological effect these weapons could achieve. On islands like Tarawa and New Georgia, rocket barrages preceded infantry assaults, softening defensive positions and eroding the morale of Japanese troops. Soldiers in foxholes, accustomed to artillery and mortars, now faced a sky ignited with fire. The rockets were unpredictable in trajectory, relentless in volume, and terrifying in sound. Reports from observers noted that even veteran defenders experienced shock, fear, and awe. The first glimpse of a new era in warfare. Integration into combat operations required careful planning. Infantry units had to coordinate closely with rocket teams. Timing was critical. Rockets fired too early might reveal positions without effect. Fired too late, they could disrupt advancing troops. Commanders learned to synchronize salvos with artillery, naval bombardment, and infantry movements, creating a layered assault that left defenders little room to react. This coordination became an essential component of the Pacific Campaign's success, illustrating how technology and strategy could converge to maximize impact. Japanese defenders, though disciplined and resourceful, faced a dilemma. Their entrenched bunkers and fortified positions were designed to withstand shells, machine guns, and grenades. Rockets, however, introduced a new variable. The sky itself had become a weapon. The fire and explosions from above could reach every ridge and hollow, bypassing natural cover. Reports from after-action interrogations revealed the disbelief and disorientation caused by this innovation. Soldiers often recounted seeing columns of fire moving as if guided by thought, and noted that the sudden intensity of attacks shattered both nerves and organization. By late 1943, the combination of M8 ground launchers and TBF aerial rockets had become a decisive component of U.S. strategy in the Pacific. The psychological and physical effects of these weapons reshaped the battlefield, demonstrating the power of innovation not just to destroy, but to shock and demoralize. American forces were no longer merely advancing through islands. They were mastering the environment, bending firepower, technology, and coordination into a singular instrument of war. As these innovations reached full maturity, Japanese troops could no longer rely solely on entrenched positions, discipline, or courage. The stage was set for confrontations where rockets would illuminate the sky, leaving defenders awestruck and vulnerable, and signaling a transformation in both the conduct of warfare and the psychology of those who fought it. Japanese infantry in the Pacific had built their defense around discipline, camouflage, and layered fortifications. From the coral ridges of Peleliu to the volcanic hills of Iwo Jima, soldiers dug deep into the earth, constructing bunkers, tunnels, and interconnected foxholes designed to repel any frontal assault. Artillery and machine guns were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, maximizing lethality while minimizing exposure. The doctrine was simple: hold the line at all costs. Yet the arrival of American rocket artillery introduced a disruptive element the Japanese had never faced. Unlike conventional bombardments, rockets did not rely solely on trajectory calculations or massed fire. They combined speed, volume, and a visible streak of fire, which created both physical destruction and psychological shock. Entire defensive positions could be compromised within seconds, often before soldiers had time to coordinate a response. Accounts from Japanese soldiers describe the effect vividly. Men entrenched for months, accustomed to the roar of naval shells and conventional artillery, were suddenly confronted with fiery streaks descending from the sky in seemingly impossible numbers. It was as though the heavens themselves were against us, one infantryman recalled after Peleliu. The combination of aerial and ground-launched rockets broke the rhythm of defense, introducing chaos where Japanese doctrine demanded order. Tactically, the rockets forced Japanese commanders to reconsider their strategies. Bunkers and fortifications, once considered almost invulnerable, were no longer safe. Rocket barrages could strike angles that artillery could not reach, collapsing tunnels, igniting supplies, and creating craters that blocked movement. Japanese engineers attempted to reinforce positions with sandbags, logs, and concrete, but these efforts were often futile against concentrated rocket fire. The psychological effect was equally profound. Rocket strikes arrived suddenly and unpredictably, creating fear and disorientation. Japanese infantry reported a heightened sense of vulnerability, even when not directly hit. Soldiers hesitated to emerge from foxholes, fearing the next salvo might sweep them away. Morale, which depended heavily on confidence in entrenched defenses, began to falter under the relentless intensity of American attacks. Coordination also became a challenge. Japanese units were trained to respond to conventional barrages with counterfire or tactical withdrawal. Rockets, however, moved faster than expected, covering large areas with successive volleys. Communication lines were disrupted, and commanders struggled to adapt. Small units, isolated in rugged terrain, found themselves under continuous bombardment, unable to regroup or maintain cohesive defense. Despite these challenges, Japanese soldiers demonstrated remarkable resilience. Many improvised countermeasures, digging secondary tunnels, using natural rock formations for cover, and employing deceptive decoy positions. Yet, even these innovations could not fully mitigate the impact of rocket artillery. The combination of technological novelty, rapid deployment, and precision targeting rendered traditional defensive methods partially obsolete. The cumulative effect of American rockets in the Pacific was transformative. They forced a reevaluation of tactics, reshaped morale, and highlighted a key reality. The sky itself had become a weapon. Japanese infantry, who had relied on terrain, discipline, and doctrine, now confronted a form of warfare that was unpredictable, mobile, and overwhelming. By the end of 1944, Japanese defensive doctrine had shifted from rigid static positions to a more reactive, fragmented strategy. Soldiers learned to anticipate barrages, disperse forces, and employ camouflage in new ways. Yet, even with these adaptations, the presence of American rocket launchers, both on land and in the air, ensured that no position was entirely safe, and that every attack carried the weight of both physical and psychological destruction. As the war progressed, these dynamics set the stage for battles where rocket barrages would define the pace and outcome. From Peleliu to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese infantry faced not only American firepower, but the fear and awe inspired by a new kind of warfare, one that could light the sky and rewrite the rules of combat. For the American crews, firing rockets was a mixture of precision, thrill, and constant danger. Infantry teams operating M8 launchers crouched behind camouflaged positions, loading rockets with practiced efficiency. Each weapon, though relatively simple, demanded coordination, timing the salvo, adjusting for wind and trajectory, and ensuring the rockets fell on the intended target. Even a small error could waste an entire volley or expose the crew to enemy fire. In aircraft, pilots armed with TBF rockets flew low, skimming the jungle canopy, engines roaring and guns ready. The bomber's speed was deceptive. To observers on the ground, the streaks of fire seemed to move impossibly fast. Pilots had to maintain absolute control while navigating enemy fire, anti-aircraft guns, and unpredictable weather. Their success depended not only on skill, but on trust. Trust in the weapon, in their formation, and in the training that had prepared them for this precise choreography of destruction. The physical and mental strain was intense. Rocket launchers created vibrations that reverberated through the ground. The smell of burned propellant hung in the air. Smoke, dust, and debris filled every space, reducing visibility to a few meters. Yet the crews operated with near ritualistic focus. Each launch, each salvo, became a sequence learned through repetition. Muscle memory that had to override fear. On the receiving end, Japanese infantry were stunned. Men trained for entrenched combat were suddenly exposed to a new, terrifying form of firepower. Rockets tore through trees, demolished bunkers, and sent columns of earth and debris into the air. The sky itself seemed alive with destruction. Soldiers ducked into foxholes, pressed against walls, or ran blindly, seeking cover from weapons they could neither stop nor predict. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. Rockets could strike angles artillery could not reach, saturate wide areas in seconds, and force defenders into reactive, disorganized patterns. Japanese officers noted that even small salvos disrupted formations, blocked communication, and made coordinated counterattacks nearly impossible. The sheer unpredictability amplified fear, causing hesitation and mistakes that further increased casualties. Yet, for the Americans, precision was never solely about destruction. It was about coordination and timing. Teams had to synchronize their volleys to cover each other, protect advancing infantry, or neutralize key strongpoints before other units moved in. Each salvo was part of a broader tactical mosaic, ensuring that rockets did not simply destroy, but shaped the battlefield to American advantage. Psychologically, rockets became instruments of awe. Japanese troops described columns of fire, descending like lightning, sometimes accompanied by the shrill whine of aerial rockets overhead. Even experienced soldiers found themselves paralyzed by the spectacle. Fear was amplified by uncertainty. They could not predict when the next salvo would arrive, nor which section of the line it would strike. At the same time, American crews felt the duality of power and vulnerability. Launching rockets was exhilarating, yet every position could be targeted by snipers or artillery. Aircraft were exposed to anti-aircraft fire, and the success of a mission often depended on split-second decisions. Survival required discipline, courage, and relentless focus. The intersection of human courage, mechanical innovation, and battlefield strategy defined the effectiveness of rocket artillery. On both sides, reactions were immediate, visceral, and enduring. American crews demonstrated mastery of complex technology under extreme pressure, while Japanese infantry experienced a form of shock that reshaped their perception of combat. In the dense jungles and ridges of the Pacific Islands, rockets were more than weapons. They were instruments of psychological warfare. They forced soldiers to question the security of entrenched positions, to confront the unpredictability of a weapon they could not anticipate, and to acknowledge that the skies themselves could be lethal. The impact of rockets extended beyond the battlefield. Commanders observed shifts in Japanese tactics, morale, and planning. Soldiers hesitated where once they charged. Defenses became fragmented, and the natural discipline that had made the Japanese infantry formidable was undermined by fear and awe. In this dynamic, the human and tactical angles intertwined. Fear and awe amplified the effectiveness of technology, while discipline and coordination maximized its destructive potential. The combination of skill, timing, and innovation turned rockets into more than a weapon. They became a decisive factor in the Pacific Campaign, reshaping both the battlefield and the minds of those who fought upon it. Technology was the backbone of the rocket campaign. The M8 and TBF launchers were innovations born from necessity, designed for mobility, speed, and psychological impact. Engineers focused on the precision of propellant, the stability of launch rails, and the explosive yield of warheads. Each adjustment improved accuracy, ensured reliable detonation, and maximized battlefield effect. The rocket's blazing trails were not just visual spectacle. They were an integrated signal, indicating where and when the next barrage would land. The technological edge extended beyond the weapons themselves. Reconnaissance planes and intelligence units provided detailed maps of Japanese fortifications. Coordinated planning allowed rocket teams to strike weak points, bunkers, and supply areas with deadly efficiency. Calculations of trajectory, timing, and synchronization were rigorous. By combining human skill with mechanical reliability, American forces transformed rockets into precise instruments capable of reshaping entire battlefields. Leadership played a crucial role. Commanders like Lieutenant General Holland Smith recognized the potential of rockets not only as physical weapons, but as psychological tools. Orders emphasized coordination between infantry, artillery, and naval units. Leaders trained troops to maintain discipline under fire, to exploit the fear rockets induced, and to integrate these weapons into broader operational strategies. Commanders observed that success depended as much on managing morale and timing as on the raw destructive power of the rockets themselves. Yet, with innovation came moral ambiguity. Rockets caused destruction and terror in a way that was immediate and visible. The psychological effect, while tactically advantageous, raised questions about the ethics of inducing fear on such a massive scale. Japanese infantry suffered immense shock, witnessing the sky erupt with fire and debris. Commanders were aware of the cost. Civilians often occupied areas near defensive positions, and the sheer intensity of rocket fire blurred the line between combatant and collateral damage. American leaders justified these tactics within the framework of strategic necessity. Island defenses were robust, Japanese troops were tenacious, and conventional methods proved costly. Rockets allowed for rapid neutralization of fortified positions, saving lives on both sides by shortening engagements. Yet, this calculus did not erase the reality. Destruction was visible, immediate, and unforgettable. The human cost lingered long after the smoke cleared. For the Japanese, leadership challenges multiplied. Commanders had to adapt entrenched defensive strategies to account for a weapon that violated traditional rules of engagement. Standard formations were vulnerable. Bunkers no longer guaranteed protection, and psychological stress undermined discipline. Decisions were made under extreme pressure, often with incomplete information, forcing rapid improvisation. Technological superiority and leadership convergence created a new dynamic: precision coupled with psychological dominance. American rocket teams executed with meticulous timing. Japanese infantry reacted under fear and confusion. The battlefield became a contest not only of weapons, but of perception. Each side attempting to assert control, one with fire and calculation, the other with discipline and improvisation. The moral dimension deepened when considering repeated bombardments. Japanese infantry reported dread at hearing the approaching whistle of rockets, often before the salvo was visible. That dread itself became a tool of war, emphasizing the emotional impact alongside the physical. Modern analyses note that the psychological disruption caused by rockets could be as decisive as the destruction of fortifications, breaking cohesion and willpower in ways conventional artillery could not. Innovation, leadership, and moral complexity intersected in the Pacific Campaign. Rockets exemplified a new type of warfare, where technology amplified human skill, commanders orchestrated both fear and precision, and ethical questions arose from the visible immediacy of destruction. They transformed combat into a multi-layered experience, combining physical devastation, psychological shock, and strategic advantage. By the late stages of the Pacific War, rockets had become a defining element of American operations. The Japanese infantry, disciplined and skilled, were forced to confront the realities of a weapon that redefined the battlefield. For Americans, the rockets were more than tools. They were symbols of ingenuity, coordination, and the evolving nature of modern warfare. In every salvo, streak of fire, and erupting bunker, the lesson was clear. Technological innovation, guided by leadership and tactical foresight, could decisively shape both the physical and psychological dimensions of battle. The sky was no longer just a backdrop. It was a weapon, a theater, and a decisive factor in victory. September 15, 1944. On the rocky ridges of Peleliu, the sun had barely risen over the coral cliffs. Japanese infantry, dug into fortified bunkers and camouflaged foxholes, braced for another day of American bombardment. They had seen artillery, mortars, and naval gunfire, but nothing prepared them for the fury that was about to descend from both sky and earth. From hidden positions, American rocket teams ignited their salvo. The M8 launchers trembled under the blast, sending a volley of fiery rockets hurtling toward the entrenched positions. Moments later, TBF aircraft streaked overhead, releasing aerial rockets in precise arcs. The sky lit up with trails of smoke and fire, illuminating the terrain in a hellish glow. Explosions ripped through coral ridges and sandbagged bunkers, sending debris flying in all directions. The Japanese soldiers froze, disbelief etched across their faces. Their defensive positions, engineered over months with meticulous care, were now shattered in seconds. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, commanding a company at Peleliu, later recalled, "It was as if the sky itself had become a weapon. We could not believe our eyes." American infantry surged forward behind the cover of rocket barrages. Each salvo softened resistance, destroyed machine gun nests, and forced defenders out of concealed positions. Coordination between rocket teams, infantry, and supporting naval artillery created a layered assault that left Japanese forces disoriented. Every bunker destroyed, every ridge swept, demonstrated not just firepower, but precision planning executed with military discipline. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Entire sectors that once required hours to neutralize fell in minutes. Japanese units attempted counterattacks, but the constant rain of rockets disrupted formations, blocked movement, and broke morale. Soldiers who had fought tenaciously against artillery now experienced a weapon that combined speed, power, and psychological terror. Across the island, similar tactics were employed. Teams of M8 launchers supported every advance, striking simultaneously from multiple directions. TBF aircraft delivered aerial rockets to hard-to-reach positions, collapsing hidden bunkers and cutting off reinforcement routes. By midday, Japanese defensive lines were fractured. Pockets of resistance remained, but the integrity of the defensive network had been broken. The human cost for American forces was significant, yet proportionally lower than expected for such fortified terrain. Rockets allowed infantry to advance with fewer casualties by neutralizing positions before close engagement. The synergy of technology, timing, and human coordination transformed the assault into a calculated choreography. Lethal, yet controlled. Chaotic, yet planned. The battle at Peleliu demonstrated a broader tactical truth. When rockets were employed effectively, entrenched defenders could be neutralized with unprecedented speed and precision. Commanders documented the psychological impact, noting widespread panic and hesitation among Japanese troops. Even elite units, trained for discipline and resilience, found themselves vulnerable to the dual threat of firepower and awe. By nightfall, the island was largely under American control. The Japanese survivors, scattered and demoralized, had witnessed a new form of warfare, one where the sky itself became a weapon, and every burst of fire carried both physical destruction and psychological weight. The victory was tactical and strategic. Fortifications were neutralized, infantry losses were minimized, and the psychological edge had shifted decisively to the Americans. The lessons from Peleliu would echo through the Pacific Campaign. Okinawa and Iwo Jima, both to follow in 1945, would witness similar applications of rocket technology on a massive scale. Japanese infantry, though courageous, could no longer rely on static defenses alone. The combination of M8 launchers, aerial rockets, and coordinated infantry tactics had introduced a level of battlefield transformation previously unseen in the Pacific theater. The success was not merely technical. It was a synthesis of planning, leadership, and innovation, a demonstration that human ingenuity, when paired with disciplined execution, could redefine the outcome of a battle. The American rocket launchers had done more than destroy bunkers. They had reshaped the psychology of the battlefield, leaving defenders in awe and fear, unable to anticipate or resist the relentless rhythm of fire from above. As the night settled over Peleliu, the survivors of both sides reflected on the day's devastation. For the Americans, the combination of courage and technology had achieved remarkable results. For the Japanese, the day confirmed a harsh truth. The skies were no longer neutral, and the battlefield had expanded upward, leaving no sanctuary untouched by the fire of precision. Following Peleliu, the Pacific battlefield was transformed. American commanders recognized that rockets were not simply supplemental weapons. They were force multipliers, capable of reshaping entrenched defenses and altering the psychology of battle. The combination of M8 ground launchers and TBF aerial rockets became standard in major assaults, providing synchronized firepower that left little room for Japanese adaptation. On Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945, the scale of rocket deployment reached new heights. Hundreds of M8 launchers, strategically positioned along ridges and flanks, unleashed a torrent of explosive fire. TBF aircraft added precision strikes from above, targeting hidden bunkers, supply caches, and fortified caves. The Japanese defenders, already aware of the rocket's capabilities, were nonetheless overwhelmed. Explosions shook the volcanic terrain, smoke and flame obscuring visibility, leaving troops disoriented and communication lines severed. The Japanese infantry attempted countermeasures: secondary trenches, decoy positions, and reinforced bunkers, but the relentless rhythm of rocket fire nullified these efforts. Soldiers reported a constant sense of exposure. No cover seemed sufficient, no shelter secure. The psychological effect mirrored the physical destruction. Troops hesitated, sometimes freezing in place, while the advancing Americans exploited every pause with coordinated maneuvers. Okinawa, April 1, 1945, offered the final proving ground. In the largest Pacific amphibious assault of the war, rocket artillery was integrated into an unprecedented scale of firepower. M8 launchers and aerial rockets struck simultaneously across multiple sectors, softening defenses and isolating strongpoints. The Japanese, despite fierce resistance and tactical ingenuity, could not withstand the synchronized assaults. Every ridge, cave, and bunker faced overwhelming fire from both sky and ground. The tactical lessons were clear. Rockets enabled rapid neutralization of fortified positions, reduced infantry casualties, and imposed a psychological strain that disrupted Japanese command and cohesion. Battles that once required prolonged bombardments and costly frontal assaults could now be executed with greater precision and speed. Technologically, American innovation reached its peak. Rocket propellants were refined for consistent velocity, launchers were adapted for mobility on rough terrain, and coordination with reconnaissance ensured accurate targeting. Combined arms integration. Infantry, artillery, naval bombardment, and aerial rockets created a battlefield environment in which Japanese forces were constantly reacting, rarely initiating action. Leadership was equally decisive. Commanders planned salvos with careful timing, ensuring that rockets preceded infantry advances, neutralized counterattack positions, and shaped the battlefield for maximum advantage. Every engagement demonstrated the importance of discipline, coordination, and flexibility, both in execution and in response to unforeseen variables. Japanese defensive doctrine, rooted in entrenched positions and disciplined resistance, faced an existential challenge. Rocket fire made static fortifications partially obsolete, forcing reliance on dispersed positions, camouflage, and improvised countermeasures. Yet, even these adaptations could not offset the combined physical and psychological pressure imposed by sustained rocket barrages. By mid-1945, the cumulative effect of rocket artillery was undeniable. Fortifications were neutralized faster, infantry movements disrupted, and Japanese morale eroded. Commanders on both sides noted that the mere presence of rockets altered behavior. Defenders moved cautiously, hunkered down, or abandoned positions preemptively. The battlefield had become a three-dimensional theater, with fire from above dictating movement, strategy, and even thought. For the Americans, the success was measured not only in destroyed positions, but in minimized casualties and accelerated advances. Rocket technology, fully integrated into operational planning, provided a decisive advantage that complemented traditional artillery, naval bombardment, and infantry tactics. It demonstrated that innovation, when coupled with discipline and strategy, could redefine the scope and outcome of battle. As the war drew toward its conclusion, The legacy of rocket artillery was clear. It had transformed the Pacific Campaign, reshaped defensive doctrine, and showcased the interplay of technology, leadership, and psychology. The Japanese infantry, once confident in entrenched positions, had witnessed the sky ignite with fire beyond imagination, a testament to the power of innovation and the harsh realities of modern warfare. The final echoes of rocket fire over Okinawa and Iwo Jima were more than the end of isolated battles. They were the climax of a transformation. Warfare had moved upward. The sky itself had become a weapon, and the American forces had proven that precision, coordination, and technological mastery could dictate the rhythm and outcome of combat. By May 1945, the impact of American rocket artillery on the Pacific Islands was unmistakable. Japanese fortifications, once considered impregnable, had been reduced to rubble. Coral ridges, volcanic caves, and bunker complexes had been systematically neutralized by coordinated rocket barrages. The physical landscape bore the scars of precise destruction, evidence of both innovation and relentless execution. Japanese infantry had endured months of psychological and physical strain. Soldiers who had once trusted in entrenched positions now faced constant exposure from fire, descending from both ground and sky. Reports describe men frozen in foxholes, hesitant to move even when their positions were compromised. The rockets had done more than destroy fortifications. They had reshaped morale and decision-making. The fear induced by their blazing arcs created hesitation, disorder, and, in many cases, surrender. American forces observed tangible benefits. Infantry losses were reduced compared to assaults without rocket support, and operations that previously required days or weeks could be executed in hours. Commanders noted that synchronized salvos not only destroyed key positions, but also created psychological leverage, enabling rapid advances and minimizing prolonged exposure to counterattacks. The destruction of supply lines and communication networks compounded the effects. Rockets obliterated ammunition depots, disrupted reinforcements, and blocked escape routes. Japanese officers struggled to maintain cohesion. Units that might have resisted were broken into isolated, reactive groups. The battlefield was no longer just a contest of skill or courage. It had become a domain dominated by technological superiority and precise execution. Civilians were also caught in the devastation, particularly in island settlements near military installations. Homes were damaged or destroyed, infrastructure crippled, and survivors reported a pervasive sense of dread at the constant roar and flash of rocket fire. Although the primary targets were military, the consequences were visible and immediate, underscoring the dual physical and psychological reach of the new weapon. Documentation from both sides highlights the profound effects. American after-action reports praised the M8 and TBF rockets for their efficiency, reliability, and adaptability to challenging terrain. Japanese accounts, including diaries and post-war interrogations, described shock, awe, and disbelief at the intensity and accuracy of the attacks. Soldiers repeatedly emphasized that no prior experience had prepared them for a weapon that could strike with such speed and visibility, shattering both confidence and defensive planning. The tactical implications extended beyond individual battles. The ability to deliver rapid, concentrated fire reshaped operational strategy. Islands that might have required prolonged siege tactics were now vulnerable to rapid neutralization. Commanders recalibrated their planning, factoring in the psychological impact and battlefield dominance enabled by rockets. Precision had become both weapon and strategy, merging destructive force with mental pressure. Even as the Pacific Campaign continued, the lessons were clear. Rocket artillery had achieved more than immediate tactical objectives. It had transformed the battlefield environment. Japanese infantry were forced into reactive stances. The cohesion of defenses fractured, and American forces gained an unprecedented advantage in both speed and effectiveness. The combination of technological innovation, coordinated strategy, and human discipline proved decisive. By the end of these campaigns, rockets had become emblematic of American dominance in the Pacific, leaving behind a legacy of both tactical success and moral contemplation. By mid-1945, the Pacific Islands bore the unmistakable imprint of American rocket artillery. Coral ridges, volcanic tunnels, and fortified bunkers lay in ruin. Japanese defensive doctrine, once built on precision, discipline, and fortification, had been upended. Soldiers faced a weapon that could strike unpredictably, saturate wide areas, and disrupt cohesion, a force that rendered traditional defenses increasingly irrelevant. Japanese commanders, forced to confront these technological realities, attempted adaptations. Secondary positions were dug, bunkers reinforced, and camouflage intensified. Soldiers were instructed to disperse and anticipate rocket salvos. Yet even these measures provided limited protection. The psychological pressure remained relentless. Hesitation, fear, and awe combined to weaken morale and reduce combat effectiveness. American forces capitalized on this advantage. Rocket artillery shortened engagements, minimized infantry casualties, and allowed commanders to execute rapid assaults across previously fortified positions. Coordination between M8 launchers, aerial rockets, and infantry maneuvers became a template for modern combined arms warfare. The lessons learned would influence military doctrine for decades. Strategically, the rockets accelerated the collapse of Japanese defensive capabilities. Key positions that might have prolonged battles for weeks were neutralized in hours. Supply lines were disrupted, reinforcement routes severed, and communication networks shattered. The psychological impact was compounded by the visibility of destruction. Soldiers could see the fire, hear the explosions, and recognize that no fortification offered true safety. The human toll, while mitigated in some respects by reduced American casualties, remained profound. Japanese infantry endured months of sustained bombardment, facing constant exposure to a weapon that seemed impossible to anticipate or evade. Civilians in proximity to military zones suffered displacement, injury, or death. Reports and testimonies later reflected the combined physical and psychological burden imposed by rockets, demonstrating the complexity of modern warfare's consequences. The integration of rocket artillery into American strategy showcased a convergence of technology, leadership, and tactics. Commanders coordinated timing, trajectories, and targeting to maximize effect while protecting their forces. Crews executed repeated launches under hazardous conditions, combining human skill with technological precision. Reconnaissance, mapping, and intelligence ensured that every salvo had purpose, creating a rhythm of fire that dictated both the tempo and outcome of battles. The long-term influence extended beyond the Pacific. Lessons learned in coordination, psychological warfare, and technological integration informed post-war doctrine, shaping approaches in Korea, Vietnam, and later conflicts. Rocket artillery demonstrated the power of innovation to transform battlefield dynamics and revealed the growing importance of morale, perception, and psychological dominance alongside physical destruction. For Japanese infantry, the consequences were enduring. Defenders recognized that even disciplined courage and fortification could be overcome by technology and strategy. The Pacific Campaign underscored a harsh reality. Modern warfare was no longer confined to ground engagement alone. The sky itself had become a weapon, and mastery of its capabilities could decide the outcome of entire campaigns. By the conclusion of the Pacific conflict, the legacy of rocket artillery was clear. It had reshaped tactics, accelerated victories, and transformed the psychological and physical dimensions of warfare. American forces had not only neutralized entrenched positions, but had demonstrated the potential of technological precision to influence the course of a war. The islands, scarred and silent after months of combat, stood as a testament to both innovation and its consequences. The psychological imprint on Japanese infantry, the strategic advantage for American forces, and the lessons for future conflicts all reflected the profound influence of rockets. The weapon had done more than destroy. It had rewritten the rules of engagement, elevated the importance of technology, and forever changed the conduct of modern war. The story of American rocket artillery in the Pacific is more than a chronicle of firepower. It is a story of human ingenuity, courage, and consequence. The M8 launchers and TBF rockets transformed the battlefield, demonstrating how technology could amplify skill, coordination, and strategic vision. Yet even as fortifications crumbled under streaks of fire, the human cost remained undeniable. Soldiers faced destruction not only from explosions, but from the fear and awe inspired by a weapon that seemed to descend from the sky itself. Precision, speed, and volume defined the rocket's effectiveness. They neutralized entrenched positions, shortened battles, and minimized casualties for advancing troops. But they also introduced a moral paradox: the power to awe and terrify, to break morale and shatter cohesion, carried consequences that extended beyond tactical advantage. Civilians, defenders, and even the operators themselves felt the weight of each salvo. Technology had changed the rules of war, but it had not eliminated its inherent human cost. For Japanese infantry, the experience was transformative. Training, discipline, and fortifications, once relied upon for survival, were insufficient against an enemy who had mastered the sky. For American crews, courage and precision combined to turn innovation into decisive advantage. And for history, the campaign demonstrated that the integration of technology, leadership, and human resolve could redefine the battlefield in both physical and psychological dimensions. The rocket's legacy is enduring. They exemplify the evolution of warfare, where the heavens became a theater of destruction, and mastery of firepower above the ground could dictate the outcome of battles. Yet they also remind us that every innovation carries responsibility. The bright trails that once lit the skies of Peleiliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were more than tactical tools. They were instruments that reshaped human perception of war, courage, and survival. In the end, the American rocket campaign over the Pacific stands as a testament to the power of innovation, the weight of strategy, and the profound intersection of human bravery and technological force. The sky, once neutral, became a weapon, and in its blaze, both the triumph and tragedy of modern warfare were revealed.